Hello and welcome to the first in this series of the Crash Course Guide for the Musculoskeletal System. Today we're going to be taking a look at some of the basic principles of the musculoskeletal system. Then we're going to work through some of the key parts of the anatomy of the musculoskeletal system and have a look at the embryology of them too. And then finally we'll take a look at the skull and vertebral column in this video. So let's get started, but let's start with some questions to see what you already know. The pterion is the joining point of which four bones? Is it the frontal, parietal, temporal and sphenoidal, the frontal, parietal, zygomatic and mandibular, occipital, frontal, parietal and mandibular, or nasal, occipital, frontal and sphenoidal? I appreciate there's a lot of words here to get your head around, so pause the video, give yourself a little bit of time to try and answer the question and try and visualize where these bones on the face are and what they join to. So the answer here is the frontal, parietal and temporal and sphenoidal bones. So this is a weak point in the skull where these four bones meet, and it's also the location of a middle meningeal artery, and this could rupture during trauma. Question 2. What nerve is responsible for innervating the anterior compartment of the upper arm? Is it the radial, axillary, musculocutaneous or ulnar nerve? So remember the muscles that are part of the upper arm, so BBC is their acronym, and the answer here is musculocutaneous nerve. And question 3. What is the active form of vitamin D? The reason I've put this question in is because many students get these terms mixed up, as there are lots of terms when understanding the transformations that vitamin D goes under. But calcitriol is actually the active form of vitamin D, and the other answers that you see here are different forms of vitamin D that are inactive in this pathway to creating active vitamin D. So, the basic principles of the musculoskeletal system, remember the functions. So it's there to support other organs, allow movement, so we sometimes refer to this as the engines, ropes and levers system, and also to protect our organs, as well as metabolic functions as well. And that's one of the many key things that people forget about the musculoskeletal system, but it actually has a lot of metabolic functions with regard to calcium and phosphate regulation. So there are tissues in the MSK system, and it's important to be aware of their function and composition, i.e. what do they do and what are they made up of. So for example, a ligament is there to resist tension, and it's made up of collagen type 1. It's also important to learn more about the function of these, and we'll go over them a little bit more later on in the video to help you understand it more. But it's really important to be aware of what they all do and what their function is, but also what they're made up of. So collagen pretty much makes up all of the tissues in the MSK system, except the synovium where this is mainly cellular, and therefore it's important to be aware of what type of collagen is making what up. So the next thing to remember is there's not just one type of bone. You can have flat bones, sinusoid bones, long bones, short bones, and irregular bones. So there are lots of different types of bones. So first of all, flat bones. These are what we find in the skull, the thoracic cage and the pelvis. And the function of these is to protect internal organs, obviously such as the brain, the heart and the pelvic organs. And flat bones are somewhat flattened and can provide protection like a shield. And they also provide large areas of attachment for muscles, which is obviously great around the face and around the thorax because that's where we have lots of our muscles. Next we have long bones. So these are longer than they are wide. It seems an obvious definition, but that's the definition of a long bone. And it includes the femur, so this is the longest bone in the body, as well as some other relatively small bones in the fingers. So the long bones function to support the weight of the body and facilitate movement. And they're mostly located in the appendicular skeleton, and that means it includes bones that are in the lower limbs and the upper limbs. Short bones, these are about as long as they are wide, and they're located in the wrist, ankle joints, and they provide stability and some level of movement. So commonly we see the carpals in the wrist, these are short bones, and the tarsals in the ankle, and these are also short bones. Next we have irregular bones, and these are any that just don't fall into our classification system. So these vary in shape and structure, and these can be flat, short, long or sesamoid, and they don't really fit into any of those categories, however, because they've got a complex shape, and it helps protect an internal organ, for example the vertebra. This is an irregular bone, but it provides the vertebral column with protection. And the irregular bones of the pelvis also don't fall into category because they protect the organs in the pelvic cavity, but as you know, the pubis, ilium and ischium are all quite abnormally shaped bones. Lastly, we have sesamoid bones. These are bones embedded in tendons. They're small, round bones, commonly found in the tendons of the hands, knees, and feet, and they function to protect the tendons from stress and wear. So this is basic anatomy of the musculoskeletal system, and I advise you go through this in your own personal time, but these are just the key parts to be aware of, and we'll go through the individual muscles later in one of these videos. So here we can see an image of two bones that are articulating together, and articulating just means interacting with each other. So this is a ligament attaching bone to bone. Then we have the synovium, which remember we said before is mainly cellular. This is the cartilage, and we'll learn about the different types of cartilage later in one of these videos. We can also see fibrocartilage here, and this is muscle, and therefore connecting the muscle to the bone we have a tendon and its aponeurosis, so connecting muscle to bone is a tendon. And here we have a nice simplified version or picture of a bone showing the key components, and what we often forget is the components and the structure of bone. We often think it's non-living and it's doesn't really have much to it, but in actual fact it's got a very dense blood supply. Articular cartilage usually lies on the top and the bottom of the bone, and it's important to be aware of the naming of the bone as well. So the proximal epiphysis at the top, followed by metaphysis, and diaphysis is the long part of the bone. So the metaphysis is almost like the neck of the bone, and the diaphysis is the long shaft, and then the epiphysis is right at the end where the articular cartilage is, ready to articulate with the next bone. It's also important to be aware of the epiphyseal line, and this is the growth plate, or the old growth plate, that is now closed up. And be aware as well of what's contained in the bone, so for example red bone marrow, yellow bone marrow, and their functions. So this is a picture of the thorax, and here we can see the sternum and the mediastinum. We can also see the diaphragm, and then we can see the ribs here and the costal cartilage joining them to the sternum in the middle. This is a picture of the scapula, and this details the different anatomical landmarks of the scapula, including the supraspinous fossa and infraspinous fossa, and this is your acromion process here, which protrudes posteriorly. So embryology of the musculoskeletal system. So mesenchyme is the same as embryonic connective tissue, and it's gelatinous substance with star-shaped mesenchymal cells. So the mesenchymal cells migrate and differentiate into many different types of primitive cell lines, such as fibroblasts, chondroblasts, and osteoblasts, and these are all cells in the adult human, and they make up different parts. So fibroblasts are adult connective tissue forming cells, chondroblasts are our cartilage forming cells, and osteoblasts are our bone forming cells. So embryology of the two skeletons. Remember, we have an axial and an appendicular skeleton, and our axial skeleton is what makes up the core, so the spinal cord and the skull, and then we also have the appendicular, which is our almost like add-on bit, so our arms and our legs. So the mesenchyme in the paroxial mesoderm will transform into osteoblasts that will form the bony elements of the vertebral column, i.e. the axial skeleton, and the mesenchyme in the somatopleuric mesoderm will transform into osteoblasts that will form our pelvic and pectoral girdles, and also the bones in the upper and lower limbs. So remember this principle of ossification, and this is essentially bone formation, and bone develops during the intrauterine life through two types of ossification, and these are membranous types and intracartilaginous types, and these form different types of bones. Remember what we discussed earlier in this video. So embryology of the muscular system, remember, have three different types of muscle. There's cardiac muscle, skeletal muscle, and smooth muscle, and the embryology behind this, so the entire muscular system of the body, develops from the mesoderm. So please bear in mind this video does jump from one part of embryology to another, and the idea behind it is that you can put it all together in your own free time and understand where the muscles come from, where the bones come, and where everything else comes from, basically. Now, if we're thinking about the facial muscles, there are 5 pharyngeal arches in human development, and we should know a little bit about each of the pharyngeal arches and what they lead to. So muscles of mastication are derived from the first pharyngeal arch and are therefore innervated by the trigeminal nerve, and muscles of facial expression are derived from the second pharyngeal arch and therefore innervated by the facial nerve. And this is pretty much all you need to know with regards to the first 2 pharyngeal arches when they concern the facial muscles. So next we'll move on to look at the skull and vertebral column for this last part of this video. So remember, the facial bones make up the framework for our face, as well as providing openings for food and water, cavities for our sense organs like our nose, our mouth and our ears, and also anchorage of our face muscles, and there are plenty of those. So there are cranial bones and facial bones. So the bones of the skull are joined together by tough sutures at fibrous joints. So remember how there's lots of different types of joints in the body. There are fibrous joints between the tough sutures of the skull. And a suture is a point where two bones meet in the skull, and typically where the flat bones of the calvarium meet. So think about those two bones I just told you about. So you've got cranial bones and facial bones, and there they are in a nice list for you. It's good to be able to be aware of which ones are cranial and which ones are facial, because that might help you in a multiple choice question, and also be aware of where they are on the face. So try to visualize them, try to draw them out, try to look at a diagram like this and see if you can label them like so. So there are some that are quite easy. So frontal's quite an easy bone to label, as is parietal, occipital, and then temporal. These are your four key most important bones to remember and make up the majority of the skull. From there on inwards it can be a little bit more difficult. So you've got the sphenoidal bone here, and it's easier to remember these sometimes by the sinuses that they represent. So your sphenoidal sinus, for example, if you've already covered the respiratory system, this will be familiar to you. If you haven't, then this is to learn about in the future. This is the zygomatic bone, this is the maxilla, and then at the bottom your jawbone, this is the mandible. This star, this is the pterion, which we discussed earlier in one of the questions at the start. And remember, it's that weak joining point, weak 4 suture joining point of these four bones, the frontal, parietal, temporal, and sphenoidal. And it's a joining point here which is weakened, and therefore if there's trauma it could cause damage to the middle meningeal artery and a bleed inside the brain. Two important muscles just to recall here in terms of the skull and the face are the occipitofrontalis and the sternocleidomastoid muscle. And the sternocleidomastoid muscle will come up over and over again in your training, and it's innervated by the accessory nerve, and it rotates the head and neck to the opposite side, and it can be found on the lateral neck, and it's quite a long muscle. Next we have a vertebral column. So this provides the support and rigidity to the trunk, which allows us to adapt to gravity. And the importance of that is it allows support and rigidity, but also allows movement. And the vertebral column is broken up into individual pieces, as you can see here on this slide. There are 7 cervical vertebrae, 12 thoracic, 5 lumbar, and 5 fused sacral vertebrae. And in between all of those, you have nerves coming off of the vertebral column as well. So the vertebral bodies, these are the largest part of the vertebra and roughly oval shape, and you can see them here in blue. We also have a neural arch consisting of all of these parts. It's important to be aware of what these parts are, particularly the spinous process and the transverse process are really important, and try and remember what they articulate with. For example, where do ribs articulate on the spinal cord? This is an important question as it often comes up in multiple choice. And finally for this video we look at intervertebral discs. So these are found between all vertebrae from C2 to S1. An IV disc is made up of 2 parts. It's the annulus fibrosus, which is the tough layer of fibrocartilaginous rim, and it limits rotation between the vertebrae. And it's this outer circular part here. And in the middle you have the nucleus pulposus, and this is made of collagen fibres suspended in a mucoprotein gel, and it's slightly softer, gelatinous, and absorbs compression forces. Now thinking clinically, rupture of the annulus fibrosus, the outer part, may allow the softer nucleus pulposus to herniate, and this may compress the spinal cord or spinal nerve, and commonly we call this a slipped disc. And that's everything for this video. Thank you very much for watching. If you do have any questions, please feel free to contact me. Thank you very much.